Hi, I'm Gerard Kramer from the University of Minnesota. This video we describe how to properly do functional hoof trimming using nippers and knives. A follow-up video will describe how to use a grinder to do the same thing. Functional hoof trimming is a trimming method described by Dr. Toussaint Raven and is taught across the world in hoof trimming courses. The goal of functional hoof trimming is to prevent or treat lameness. The first step in step one is to measure the claw the appropriate length. To use that, we use a gauge that is 3 inches long. It's 3 inches from here to here. And the reason we use 3 inches is because on the majority of the cows, 3 inches is appropriate toe length for the foot. When we're measuring using the gauge, we start from the coronary band or where the hard horn starts. So if you run your finger along, there's a piece of horn that starts right here. We place the gauge and we're going to make a cut. We're going to remove this part of the foot. An alternative to using a gauge would be to use your hands. For most people, 4 fingers is very similar to the gauge, 3 inches or 7.5 centimeters on the gauge. So if I use my fingers, I can figure out where I need to hold my hand on the coronary band to get the appropriate length. This way I don't need to use a gauge for every single foot. The first step in step one is to make an appropriate cut at the right length. To use it, typically when we're using nippers and knives, we use the nipper to do this. It is important to hold the nippers at the appropriate angle when we're making this cut. An appropriate angle is when you're done making the cut, is the nipper ends up in a parallel line to the sole. So if I was going to cut this foot, I'm going to take my measurement, I know where I need to be, I'm going to bite into it, and then I'm going to press evenly down like that and make my cut. So when I'm done with the cut, the nippers end up in a parallel line with the sole. We don't want the nippers to end up too much like this or too much like this, because it'll throw off the thickness that we're going to measure in the next step of step one. The next step in step one is to bring the sole down to the appropriate thickness. To do this, we use the gauge, which is a 1/4 inch thick or 6 millimeters, and we're going to hold it at the dorsal wall, and we're going to trim off the appropriate sole to get to that appropriate thickness. To do this, I'm going to use a knife, and when I'm using my knife, I want my wrist locked, and I want to make strong movements. Can you like that? And I focus on trimming on the wall instead of on the sole, because if I trim the sole, it's going to leave it at the inappropriate angle. When I'm trimming, I always check to make sure I'm at the appropriate angle, and we're going to keep the angle at from the metatarsal. So we want it to be at 90 degrees from the metatarsal or the cow's leg when she's standing. So I keep checking that while I'm trimming. The other thing we're watching for is to make sure that we have a flat enough surface area for the cow to walk on, which is the same 3 inches from the gauge, from the tip of the toe to there. So I have enough surface area for this cow to walk on. Part of the trimming process is to spare the medial heel as much as we can. So we don't want to touch this medial heel if we don't need to. Okay, for step 2, what we're going to do is we're going to copy the design we have on the medial claw to the lateral claw. One of the things we want to do when we're trimming a cow's foot is balance the heels. So as you can see on this foot, the lateral claw, which is this claw right here, is not balanced with the medial claw. So part of step 2 is going to be where we're going to lower this heel to make sure the weight is balanced between the 2 claws. So we're going to cut the toe the same length, hold the nippers at the same angle as previously described. So we've made the same cut. Now we're going to trim the foot to get to the same height from lateral to medial claw. You can stand and pull up like this. Always position your hands so there's no chance of them getting cut with the knife. And you'll notice I'm taking long strokes with my wrist locked. This prevents you from creating a cupped surface when we're trimming. As I'm doing this, I'm checking to make sure I have the flat surface, so there's no cupping or concavity in the foot. And I'm also checking the height difference between the two heels. We can see that there's equal weight bearing between the two toes. And then if we move the block up, we can see that the medial claw is bearing a lot more weight than it was previously and is actually bearing most of the weight in this claw at this point in time. The goal would be to balance the weight bearing or shift more of it towards the medial claw. The next step in the trimming process is the step 3, which is the modeling process. The purpose of the modeling process is to remove weight from underneath the flexor tuberosity. This prevents sole ulcers. To properly do modeling, we need to understand the toe triangle. From the axial wall and the abaxial wall, right here, and then the toe triangle would be right about there. When we're doing the modeling process, we don't want to go into the toe triangle, and we want to remove all this horn right here, right underneath their flexor tuberosity. As you can see, this foot looks like there's some damage there, so we might see something when we're actually trimming part of step 3. For the modeling process, we're going to use our wrist to remove all this loose or all this horn around here. We can be quite aggressive. As you can see, this foot has a sole ulcer, so we have to be careful when we're doing the modeling process to not hit the corium. I've just moved to the other position to make sure I can get the appropriate spot right in here. For the next step of step 3, we're going to model the medial claw. For that, we're just going to remove a little bit of horn on this claw right here, not going into the toe triangle, trying to create a space between here. On a healthy foot, after we've completed step 3, this foot would be finished. However, because there's a lesion on this foot, a sole ulcer right here, and some heel horn erosion, we have to move on to steps 4 and 5. Steps 4 and 5 are therapeutic trims. In step 4, we're going to take the weight off the lesion, and in step 5, we're going to remove the loose horn on the heels. I'm going to proceed and do those steps together to start. So I'm going to remove all this loose horn and lower the weight of this heel as part of step 4. That's going to relieve the pressure on the sole ulcer site. And you can lower the heel as much till it starts to get soft. So as you can notice, there's a soft spots right here. So I'm going to stop there. And then I'm going to continue just moving down, doing it right around here. The purpose of this step is to remove all weight bearing from the sole ulcer site. So as we do steps 4, we're trying to remove all loose horn around the sole ulcer. So there's a little bit of loose horn here yet. I've removed some of the loose horn around here. And as you can see, when I remove this horn that was here previously, there's manure and dirt tracked in here. The goal of removing the loose horn is to prevent those bacteria from growing on the corium, which is the tissue that's exposed here. So I'm going to continue removing the loose horn that's left around this lesion. And as I'm doing this, I'm taking great care to try and not damage the corium. You can see there's a little loose flap there, so I'm removing that. Same with it around here. There's still a little flap right there, so I'm going to try to remove that. Okay. Now that I've removed all the loose horn around this lesion, I'm going to move on to removing the loose horn around the heels. This is an important step in routine trimming to try and prevent the bacteria that can set the cow up for digital dermatitis. So we're exposing these anaerobic bacteria to oxygen by opening up these loose horn that's around here. So I'll proceed to do that on both the lateral and the medial claws. And the whole goal is to try and create a smooth surface instead of having all this frayed horn around the foot. As I'm doing this, I'm taking great care on the medial claw to protect the heel up in here, because we want to protect that heel as it's going to, now in this case, wearing a lot of the weight, bearing a lot of the weight. I'm going to continue removing this horn, taking great care not to remove any of the heel depth that I've created with the trimming. In this foot, we have multiple lesions. We have a sole ulcer, and we have interdigital hyperplasia. To treat the interdigital hyperplasia during a routine trim, what we do is we try to be quite aggressive inside here to prevent the irritation on the hyperplasia. We do the same on the other side, which in this scenario is complicated a little bit because of the sole ulcer that's also existent. The final step in steps 4 and 5 with a cow that has a sole ulcer is to apply a hoof block at this location. Another video will explain proper hoof block application.